Hey guys, it's Vernie here. Just thought I would do a quick video on a tier list. I think it was Liquid Max did this on stream, and I thought it was pretty interesting. Thought maybe I could give my opinion. I've run a couple hundred Mythic Plus every season. I think season 1 I ran 540-ish dungeons. Season 2 I ran 400, and then so far in season 3 I've run like 450-ish. So we are kind of an addict when it comes to Mythic Plus. But go ahead and give our thoughts on these. Maybe you guys can provide some thoughts in the comments. What you liked, what you didn't. My perspective, the first season I was a 2700 player. Second season I again ended at 2700, and third season 3K. Mostly tanking, some DPSing. I think I did a pretty equal part tanking and DPSing between the seasons. I have a lot of alts, so some kind of varied perspectives, which is nice. Healing is definitely my least done role. But go ahead and get started. We'll briefly outline some of this. So for S tier, that is a dungeon that you would say is a banger, that you would be happy running over and over and over, and really isn't flawed. I wouldn't put too many dungeons in S, as you'll see. A means pretty good. Maybe there's one or two bosses that are off, or some really hard trash. B is mid. You're fine running it, but you're not overly excited. C is like, wow, this dungeon kind of sucks. There's very little to redeem. F means it's a shit turd and you never want to see it again. You hate it, you avoid it. We all know that there's at least one key a season that belongs in F. I'm going to try to be balancing these based on kind of their ending tune. So I know, tuning wise, some of these dungeons started off really, really difficult. But we're going to try to look past that and see how they ended up. Now, it might color the letter grade a little bit depending on how good or bad the release was, but we'll get into that. So, let's go ahead and just start going down this list. Algothar Academy. So, I kind of want to put it in S. I really liked the theme of this dungeon. Some of the roleplay was a little over the top. The voice lines were very extra. But after they had tuned Veximus and the tree boss specifically, this dungeon was fun as hell. I love this dungeon. There's plenty of AoE. You got to pick a buff at the start, which was nice. You could kind of customize if you needed, more burst or if you preferred haste, whatever. Some really huge trash pulls, which everybody loves doing big damage. It required a good bit of coordination, but I think once they had tuned the bosses a little bit, this one was a banger for me. I loved Algothar Academy. Now, Azure Vault. Uh, really mixed feelings on this one. There were good and some bad things. I didn't like that people did the golem trash, where you had to do knock-up chains and stun chains because they would frontal your tank, and on fortified it would pretty much one-shot them. And some of the bosses were extremely punishing. The first boss, if your tank didn't point the frontal at the right spot and destroy enough trees, you were dead. If people didn't spread out properly and cover the trees, you were dead. The second boss was fucking miserable. I hated that boss with the ridiculous ice cutters and the constant ad spawning, and then the bullet hell second phase. Third boss was mostly fine. It was a lot of damage, but fine. Fourth boss was interesting. I got to give them points for the fourth boss. I kind of liked the anti-movement mechanic, especially if classes who could break it. You could make some good choices, but I'm going to put this one in B. I was not thrilled about Azure Vault. I did not like running it. It's probably the key I failed the most, maybe second most in Season 1. So, not a huge fan of this one, especially tanking. Really rely on other people doing CC chains for you. So, not great. Court of Stars. Really mixed opinions on this one. We've seen it a lot. It's been around since Legion. It comes around pretty much every time walking rotation. I think we've done it so many times. It's got to be hundreds of times at this point. At first, I liked that the class-based mechanics. If you have a shaman, you get move speed, or if you have a blacksmith, you can instantly kill a mini boss. That's kind of interesting, but too many frontals in this dungeon. Purple on purple is awful. Half the mechanics were purple. A lot of people like complained. If you didn't have like your graphical settings set up a certain way, it was really hard to see these frontals. The last boss, same way with the tornado lines, it was really hard to see. I am not big on quarter stars. I'm gonna give it a C. Like I did it because it was easy, but I did not enjoy it. Halls of Valor. So another Legion dungeon. A lot of RP, but they did shorten a lot of that for the Mythic Plus version. And Herja wasn't quite as bad as she was during Legion. They removed some of her one-shot potential. I actually really like this dungeon. So a good bit of coordination with some of the Thunder Callers. You had to kick the cast, or they would just destroy you, especially on Fort. But I kind of liked it. There's a lot of good pulls. Um, yeah, I don't know. I didn't really dislike any of the bosses that much. After they'd fixed Herja, I gotta give it an A. I was pretty happy with Halls of Valor. It's one of the longer keys, which may be the only downside that probably keeps it from an S. But I liked Halls of Valor a lot. No Good Offensive. Oh, another one of the long ones. It was okay. The second boss, the Tempest, I think was miserable. I did not like healing it. The first few months, it was a real big struggle. Communicating with people, like when to get balls and how they should let the healer also get balls, was sometimes difficult in pugs. The last boss, that second phase where you have the four ads and you have to kind of group them up and they just spam casts and then there's lightning spawning all around you. Eh. There were a lot of big pulls, which was nice. The first and the third bosses were fine. I didn't have a problem with either of those. The trash was good, I thought, mostly. Hmm, but it was long. I don't know. I feel like I could give this an A and be happy with it. I enjoyed No Good mostly. Apart from the second boss, which I think knocks it down a little bit. But Ruby Life Pool, so the Dragonflight dungeon. On opening, if this had been like based on the opening tuning, this would go in C or F for sure. I hated this dungeon. But the more that I played it, I think the better that we got. And like that first section before the first boss, there was a lot of mob control you could do and a lot of cool pulls. The second set, like right after the first boss where you're up in the on the ring, I didn't like having to dodge the dragon because there was always one dragon you would skip. You would never do both dragons if you could help it. Second boss was pretty hard. I mean, it wiped a lot of groups. I wasn't big on the second boss, but the last boss I liked a lot. You know, with the winds and the fire. It was interesting. It required your group to actually press CDs properly, like defensive to survive. But like atmosphere wise, aesthetically, it's good. It was pretty fast. It wasn't a super long one. So I think based on the end tuning of this one, I'm gonna give it an A, which might be kind of controversial. I know a lot of people don't like Ruby Life Pools, but this one grew on me a lot. Shadow Moon Burial Grounds. A Warlords of Draenor dungeon. We've done it, again, hundreds of times. It was by far the easiest key in Season 1, so I ran it a lot, but it was boring. Oh my god, it was so boring. Bone Maw, the worm boss, was awful. I don't know what was up with the health scaling, but it felt like, especially in Tyrannical, it just lived for so long. Nerzul was fine. I didn't really have a problem with any of the trash. You know, like the double Void Elemental near the end was kind of difficult, but it's a very mid key. I was excited to do it on alts, you know, to get 18s done, to get like good vault slots, but I didn't care for it. We'll just put it in B. Not really positive or negative. Now, Temple of the Jade Serpent. I think this is the dud. Excuse me. I hated this key. This key sucked balls. The trash was ridiculously hard. You had the water speakers casting fucking water bolts constantly. And if you didn't kick them or grip them, they would just destroy your DPS. But the best part was they had no spell lockout. So even if you kicked them, they would just keep fucking casting. They didn't stop for a second. And I find mobs like that really irritating. It's like if you don't have a DK, you're screwed. Like they're just going to continuously chain cast. It's like, no thank you. The first boss, Wise Mari, with like the rotating water, awful. Awful boss. such garbage, dog shit. Like the visual clarity on that mechanic was terrible. I still don't think it's been fixed properly. I'm sure it still bugs when people walk a certain way or jump. So second boss was fine. Jade Dragon boss, awful. Awful as a tank, especially with thundering. If you had to go out and drop a mechanic while she was kicking you, you were screwed. It did ridiculous damage. The waves weren't always easy to predict where they were going from her. And the last boss, pretty high healing requirement because there was two dispels. Basically, if you couldn't, have a Shadow Priest to self dispel or an Imp from a Warlock to self dispel or a Dwarf Racial, it was really really hard. So this key was really unrewarding. There wasn't any cool trinkets or anything from this one. Hated it. I hated running it. Definitely an F. Stinker. Okay, well that concludes the season 1 dungeon. So moving on to season 2, we have Brackenhide, another Dragonflight dungeon. So this is one before we started, before we started Raid, we did a round of Mythic Zeros, right? And in Brackenhide, I was like, okay, this is going to be the worst Mythic Plus by far whenever we get there. I hate this place. But, to their credit, between season 1 and 2, they fixed a lot of the problems with Brackenhide that were present in Mythic Zero. And in the dungeon, it was fine. You weren't required to have a disease dispel. It did help, but you didn't need it. If you had an alchemist, you could open the cauldrons, and that was fine. The first boss, fine. I mean, it had basic mechanics. Dodge the blade storm, heal up during the bleed, kill the totem. I didn't think it was that bad. The only negative I had with this dungeon is probably Stink Breath. Between the tree boss and the pack leader, that mini boss sucked, and you couldn't skip it because it had True Sight. So that's gonna knock a little bit off of it. But I thought the third boss was interesting, with the traps and the dogs. Most of the trash was fine; it could be controlled. Some of the mobs were stun immune, but for the most part, you could kick or move things as needed. I really didn't have a problem with this dungeon. I kind of liked it. Had a lot of AoE, a lot of pad. People like doing big numbers, so I'm gonna give that one A. Freehold. I mean, do I even need to say it? It's an S. It's an easy S. As much as I complain about pirate themes being overdone, this one was sick. A lot of AoE. The bosses were pretty easily understood. Like, the mechanics weren't difficult. They removed some of the one-shot potential from BFA with, Council of Captains, Eudora's Grape Shot specifically. That's fixed. And then her cone-wide barrage, it just put a die. It doesn't instantly kill you. Very nice. Can't really complain about anything. A lot of cool stuff in this dungeon. A lot of big pulls. Again, we like big numbers here. No real downsides. I love this key. Halls of Infusion. Another Dragonflight one. Kind of mixed. The trash was okay. I wasn't a huge fan of the orbs at the beginning that spam channeled into someone, and if one guy got, 2 or 3 on him, he was dead instantly. And you couldn't really stop him. You could kick him, but they would just start casting again. First boss, pretty mid. I didn't really like the dispel mechanic. You like the lightning circles, dropping giant puddles under you and trying to run away. It was kind of interesting that he was under a certain health threshold, so you could execute if you're one of those classes, but Second boss, really nothing to say about the Toad. I think the worst part of this dungeon is honestly the trash between the Toad and the third boss. With all the dragons that do the group-wide AoE. With a priest, originally you could get around it with Mind Soothe, but then they fixed that. So you could no longer do it. And that sucked. That was not fun. Third boss was pretty irritating. Some of the visual clarity on the cyclone mechanic was not great. Sometimes you'd be behind a pillar, and it seemed like you were behind it, but the game says you weren't, and you would die. And then, of course, the gauntlet was pretty awful after this boss. And the fourth boss was annoying because it wasn't percentage-based, it was time-based. So if you got thrown into those intermissions where you got thrown back into the hallway and you had to walk up the gauntlet of, alternating water, it was miserable. If you did it more than once, it was awful. I got to give that one an F. I'm not a fan of Halls of Infusion. Also, it required Mass Dispel, which is stupid and cringe. Okay, Old Man, Legacy of Tyr. Another Dragonflight dungeon. This was a really long one. A lot of AoE, which is nice. First boss was fine. The dwarves were cool. They had some interesting voice lines, I guess. Trog boss was okay. You need a pretty good DPS to get down the totem. If you got it down, then it was very easy. If you didn't, he did a lot more damage. The third boss without a bleed dispel and higher keys was miserable. You had to have a bleed dispel. A lot of damage in that on that one. Also, the stone sentinels prior to him that put the bleed on the tank. If you don't have stuns, it's pretty fucking hard. Fourth boss was the golem. Eh. They fixed the visual issues with his fireballs like late into the season, so I was more okay with that once they fixed that. And the last boss, I don't know, the last boss was okay. Again, it was like you needed a lot of dispels and people like stand in proper spots. It was fine, I guess. I don't like hate it. I don't love it. I'm gonna give it a B. Neltharion's Lair. So this one, I had never been a big fan of this one from Legion. I complained about it. I hated the pelters. I hated the kite meta where you had to get a bunch of threat and run away, and that was the only way you could get the pelters to do anything because they would just sit at 100-yard range and chuck shit at you. But it actually turned out to be okay. The first boss killed the little skitterers before the slam, and you're all good. If you didn't, you died. The frontals from the golems after the first boss were mostly fine. Tank had to CD to live through it. Second boss with the totem, like in the little cup game, that's fine. Obviously, you couldn't stand on the middle because there was like a visual bug with the with the hands coming up. Worm was pretty hard. The worm, there was some really degenerate shit with poison cleanses or the venom sacks from Upper Blackrock Spire, which is a classic dungeon. That's kind of cringe. That definitely knocks some points off of it. Last boss was fine. Most of the last trash was fine. It hit hard, but I think it was fair. I was okay with this dungeon. I'm gonna give it a B. Oh, Neltharis. This is one of my least favorite ones, I think. Uh, I didn't like. There was a lot of fun trash, but when the chain mechanic became prevalent, I really started disliking this dungeon because it encouraged really ridiculous pulls. And it was sometimes hard to communicate with people that you were pulling, 20 mobs. Okay, pull 20 mobs, and 3 of you hit this one, and then 2 of you need to save your chain for the next pull, and you can't get hit by anything because you'll die. And if you do any damage at all while the tank is gathering, you die. Um, the mammoth was fine once they had neutered his damage a little bit. The second boss was okay, apart from the weird bug where sometimes 3 chains wouldn't come out if someone died mid chain cast, and then you couldn't stagger him. That's definitely a negative. Um, Third boss was fine, the Forge Master. The last boss was awful. Originally, the items that you picked up, not only were they random, but you could not cast them while moving, and some of them moved you. So you would use it, and it would charge into the boss and right into a flame circle, and you would instantly die. Not fun. Similar to Necrotic Wake, I don't like dungeons where you pick up weapons to like cheese the dungeon. I think it's boring, and it's just not a mechanic I enjoy learning or having pugs do. I don't know. I don't like it. I'm gonna give it an F. Just because of that. I'm gonna give it an F. Oh, Underrot. This one is actually like my favorite probably from BFA. I really liked the kind of rotting old god aesthetic. So I liked Underrot a lot. The trash is pretty fun. They all require decent amount of kicks, but nothing too crazy. There's like a good amount of AoE. There's some variance in pull paths depending on how you want to do it. What you clear in the middle room, or if you take left or right path after your second boss. First boss was fine. Don't stand in frontals. Kick stuff. Very easy. Second boss, like once people discovered the bones strat where you just tanked Kragmaw right up against the bones, really easy to get all the worms. Mushroom boss was fine. Like skilled players could very easily get through it and clear it all without having the explosion go off. And then the fourth boss, again, fine. I mean, this is a fine dungeon. I really can't complain about anything. It wasn't long. It wasn't overly taxing. There was some good loot in here. You had the fist weapon. You had the good strength trinket for unholy DKs. I'm gonna say S. Honestly, I like this dungeon a lot. Vortex Pinnacle, not a good one. Don't like it. They had to nerf this dungeon like 7 or 8 times because the stars on the last boss were so ridiculously huge. Their health pool was gigantic. It was awful. Trying to kill them was really difficult before another one spawned. So the dragon was also miserable. Most of the trash was pretty annoying. You had the cyclones. You had the fucking mobs at the beginning to put up the barrier shield. I don't know. I hated this dungeon. I don't think it translated very well. I'm gonna give it a C. Atal Dazar. I think Atal is pretty good. We've done it a bunch. It's been around since BFA. It is a good dungeon. There's a lot of like fun different pull paths you can do. You can go left and get the confessors and the colossus, or you can go right and pull the honor guards, which are pretty difficult healing wise. But I like the bosses. Razan is good. I think it allows for some cheese with Shadow Meld or Invis, Bop, Feign Death, Vanish. Third boss is like it's not an issue. You just step into the blood pools and she kills herself. Yasma is the hard one. Yasma is really difficult. If your tank doesn't know how to move properly, or your DPS are standing in Africa baiting spiders to a weird spot, it's hard. You need to move as a group together in kind of an L. So, the tank will be here and the group will be here, and then when the stuff spawns, the group moves here, etc. You just need to like bait the spiders in a predictable pattern, and this boss is fine. So I'm gonna give it an A. Pretty good overall. I like it. I've done it a lot. I'm not over the moon, but I'd say pretty good. Blackrook Hold. Again, another dungeon we've done a lot. Some Legion. Some really big pulls going up the left-hand side right off the bat. Just got to kick the counselors. First boss, it basically requires no healing. It's completely brain dead. Second boss, again, almost completely brain dead if you kick the mage. There is some CC required between bosses 1 and 2 for the knife dances and the arcane blast from the mage. Third boss, also pretty easy, especially if you take the fell lines out and don't clutter the middle of the room. Very, very simple. Last boss, you cool down the first Shadow Bolt volley, you're free. It's good. I'm going to give it an A. It's good. I like it. It's quick. Pretty good AoE. So Darkheart. Darkheart, I like the aesthetic. I'm not super sold on some of the dungeon mechanics. The first pull where you grab all the cats, plus the owls, plus the bear can be challenging for some groups, especially on Fortified. You need to be topped from the cat jump, you need to kick the owls so they don't disorient, and you need to depoison the poisoners because they put out a poison AoE on someone. So without a poison dispel, it can be difficult. The tree boss is pretty miserable. Honestly, the first two bosses are pretty miserable, especially on Tyrannical. They do a lot of damage. Positioning needs to be good. The tank can't point the Nightmare Breath at people. People need to be breaking the roots and killing them so that they don't spawn ads. Third boss is fine. Fourth boss can be rather annoying with the Apocalypse, just depending on where the swirlies fall, because sometimes he gets 10 stacks, and sometimes he doesn't. And even if you kind of glitch him under the little ledge, he can still get stacks pretty easily. And if he gets 10 stacks and then he channels on someone, they're dead. But overall, okay dungeon. And I'm going to give it a B. It's fine. Everbloom? Okay. I like this one. The bosses are hard on Tyrannical, and some Fortified. You could say that some of the affixes probably are a little too impactful, specifically bursting. The little lashers probably should not apply bursting. They have way less health than everything else. And that is an argument to be made, I think. But overall, this is a fun dungeon. You can do some really big pulls. Pull 20 mobs at the beginning in Lust, and it feels really good. The first boss feels really good because he's got a damage amp phase. As long as you position properly, you can stay in that phase for a long time. Second boss, depending on the kicks, can be difficult. Really, you just need one person on the Toxic Bloom on the right caster, and like one ranged on the left for the heal. And if melee don't scum, it's pretty fair. I'm gonna give this one an A. Pretty good. Galakron's Fall. So this is the first half of Dawn of the Infinite. It's okay. The first boss is kind of a non-issue. The second boss was really difficult for healers initially, especially because there was a little unintuitive mechanic where if you moved after being dispelled, you would get ticked twice by the wave radiating outwards. That part sucked. Was not a huge fan of that. But I think most of the trash was pretty doable. The trash overall was really easy. The third boss, again, as long as you juggle the slime appropriately, is fine. Iridicron also fine. Kind of a fun healer fight because you get to do big healing to Chromie. So overall, decent dungeon. I don't love it. I don't hate it. Some cool stuff in here. I've got the cheat death trinket, some of the time strike daggers and warglaves. Pretty cool. We'll give it a B. Murazan's Rise, the second half of Dawn. I hate this dungeon. I hate it. I don't even know what to say other than I hate it. I think the mini boss trash pulls at the beginning are awful. They have way too much health. Kind of a lot of kicks needed between the volleys plus whatever the mini bosses cast. Tyr is miserable. He has way too much health. Battlefield is fine as long as people position properly. Morchi is also fine now that they've nerfed her from Mythic 0. But the last boss is pretty awful. I don't know. It feels bad. It feels bad doing no actual damage to a boss and just killing ads that take away percentages of his HP. Like the bubble mechanic where you step into a sand puddle for 3 seconds and wait for the other one to blow up and then move. Not a huge fan of it. A lot of people don't like this key. I don't like this key. I'm going to give it a C. Throne of the Tides. So again, a dungeon I originally didn't like very much, but it kind of grew on me, you know? It does require a lot of kicks and some group coordination, especially on Fortified. This trash is really dangerous. The gauntlet at the end in particular is really hard if you don't pull properly. You can get the disease stack really high, and then the swell from the elemental just kills you. But I think the first boss is good. The second boss is pretty good. The third boss is very challenging, tank and healing wise, but overall fun. I think all of the trash is pretty fun. I don't really have any major complaints other than like the gauntlet. The gauntlet's definitely kind of a downer for me. The last boss can be hard to like. I know there were some issues with the visual clarity of the oil that you had to like kind of suck up with Neptulon's water. That knocks it down a little bit, but it's okay. I like it enough. We'll give it a B. And finally, we have Waycrest Manor. I love this dungeon. Again, some of the BFA dungeons had sick aesthetics, and the whole like dressed witch aesthetic is perfect. Uh, I can't really think of any trash that like really just bothers the hell out of me. Like there's a lot of good AoE. There's a moderate amount of kicks. It's not ridiculous. The triad, the first boss is pretty fun. It's, like every boss has a single mechanic to deal with, but nothing too taxing. You could argue the tree boss on Tyrannical is kind of garbage. That people were running PvP trinkets to break it, but I didn't run higher than a 24, so I never ran into that. Um, yeah, I really can't say anything like super negative about this dungeon. I love this dungeon. Maybe I'm in the minority, but I'm gonna give it an S. It's got to be one of my favorite ones. Okay, and that is our Mythic Plus tier list. If you guys have any opinions or you want to discuss something, drop it down on the bottom. I'd love to hear what you guys think. I do think for season 4 they're going to bring back the rest of the Dragonflight dungeons. So I'm kind of interested to see. Maybe I'll change my opinion on some of these in season 4 during Faded. But anyway, feel free to come check me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/Veronix. Leave a comment below if you have anything to say, and we'll see you next time. Peace.